colleague, City Councilor Ed Flynn, and we are here today to discuss Docket 0663, an ordinance amending the City of Boston Code, Ordinances Chapter, multiple chapters here. We got 6, 7, 16, 18, concerning registration of licensing of dogs, transferring of an animal care and control unit from Inspectional Services Department to the Parks and Recreation Department. This matter was sponsored by our Mayor, Mayor Martin J. Walsh, and referred to the Committee on Government Operations on April 24th of 2019. This is not the first time that animal care and control unit has been moved. In 2014, the animal care and control unit was moved from property management over to inspectional services. With us here today on behalf of the administration, we have the Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space, Commissioner Parks and Rec, Chris Cook, and also Nicole Duhamel, Director of Finance at the Parks and Recs Department. And if my colleague has any opening comments at this time about animal control, good, we can go right into it. So I'll throw it right over to the administration to give us your thoughts on why it makes the most sense to go from now from inspectional services over to Parks and Recs. And as I mentioned, initially it went from property management to inspectional services. That made perfect sense, so I'm sure this makes perfect sense as well. So I'll defer to the chief to give us his explanation as to why this ordinance is important.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilor Flynn. And I promise this time we think we're going to get it right. Animal care and control, and the important word in there is animal care. That's what was added. We do see a lot of the wildlife interactions actually taking place on our public lands, so we do think that we are the right agency to actually absorb this city entity for a lot of regulatory reasons. A lot of the conflicts, whether it's off-leash dogs or if it's or wildlife such as geese and coyotes, they actually occur on our properties, and so it runs into the existing city ordinances and rules regulating parks and open spaces. In addition, with the mission of the Inspectional Services Department being so specific, and with the mission of the Parks and Recreation Department being focused on engaging people in the environment and the quality of our wildlife in the city, we do think there's an opportunity to capitalize on the learning environment that Parks and Recreation, through all its outreach programs, and actually be able to get people to understand some of the rules and regulations behind animal care and control. So we think that not only it makes sense from a regulatory perspective, but we really think it makes sense from an educational perspective to absorb it into the Parks and Recreation Department. We already enjoy a great relationship with the Inspectional Services Department, specifically the Animal Care and Control Division. We work with them on almost a daily basis, and the majority of their time is actually spent typically on our properties or on Public Works Department city streets. That being said, we do see the issue before you today as sort of a formality as we approach amending the ordinance of the City Council. A lot of the language you'll see just strikes the term Inspectional Service Department and replaces Parks and Recreation. And then I just do want to flag that with the transfer of animal care and control, the revolving fund associated with animal care and control would also be transferred over to the Parks and Recreation Department. And of course, that would go through all the auspices and oversight of the City Council that all revolving funds in the city go through. So we appreciate your consideration. I'm joined by our Director of Finance, Nicole Duhamel. And if there's any questions at all, we'd be happy to answer them.
And Chris, just for the record, 16-1.9C, dog registration and licensing. I think there's a change that needs to be highlighted with respect to all employees and positions.
That's right. So I'll just read that, if it's all right to read the specific language to you. So we want to highlight that this additional language clarifies Section 4 of the ordinance, making clear that all currently existing positions in the Animal Care and Control Unit in Inspectional Services Department are being transferred to the same positions in the unit in the Parks Department. As currently written, the ordinance only transfers those positions explicitly referenced in the code, which does not reflect the entire makeup of the Animal Care and Control Unit. And Nicole will correct me, but I think there's 18 positions overall. And so we're not removing any of the mission critical positions from the Inspectional Service Department. These are only people who are associated with animal care and control.
Right. And Chief, any factors that drove the decision to move animal care from ISD to Parks? Was it 311 calls, complaints,
Oh, yeah.
jurisdictional issues?
And I'm not playing favorites because there's two South Boston residents in front of me, but an example would be Medal of Honor Park. There's increasing frustration among constituents that they have to reach out to two different departments to have a community meeting about off-leash dogs in the park, and then they would have to have coordination between the Parks Department and ISD, and then have animal care and control. Now we think that we could actually deploy them citywide in a way that makes sense, that is being driven by the 311 calls. Okay. That's just a small example of it, but I also think the other important aspect is that Parks and Recreation's department, we have so many more resources as far as outreach of getting educational materials into the hands of our residents, whether it's our coffee hours or our 300 or 400 different free programs that we run through our arts and cultural programs. It's very easy for us to just also have animal care and control officers on hand at some of those events to start educating the public about things that they can do about engaging with wildlife. I want to be really clear that this is very different from pest control and rat control. That's gonna remain in the offices that it is.
Okay, and that sort of moves in the direction of my next question. Those are the complaints I get regularly across the city. It's the dogs off leash, and then folks are told to call 311, and they do. Obviously, we get a significant number of 311 calls, but by the time someone is dispatched, dog has already gone to the bathroom, person's already
100%.
back home, and so we kind of miss it. So I'm hoping maybe that the transfer to animal care and control to parks would maybe help improve the response time, so we can actually kind of catch the person that's putting the dog without the leash.
I think so. I mean, one of the aspects that we have through our community meeting process and just our engaging with the friends groups at these different parks is that you actually start to recognize the behavior. So I'll give you an example of Fallon Field and Rosendale, where we did have an issue with off-leash dogs, and we still continue to have an issue with off-leash dogs on the baseball field. We were at that time able to coordinate with Animal Care and Control, because you're absolutely right. By the time Animal Care and Control theoretically responds to a 311 call, they may be responding at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, no one's walking the dogs. If we work closely with the community members and the friends group of those parks, dog walkers tend to be habitual, and they tend to come and walk their dogs or not, or have their dogs off leash at certain times. We do think there's an opportunity to coordinate between those community members and Animal Care and Control, so it's a more proactive approach.
Great. And then to Nicole, obviously on the finance side, will the transfer, will we recognize any cost savings at all? As Chief had just mentioned, we may have some new initiatives, we may have some new programming partnerships with the friends groups in order to try to rein in the issue around dogs off the leash in parks. But the 18 being transferred from ISD to parks, any cost savings that jumps to mind, maybe other than maybe just the initial, maybe more efficient and some time savings? But
one thing we're hoping, one potential might be actually not savings with animal control, but savings with the ranger horses. We're hoping that by bundling our orders of animal supplies, that now we'll have the animal control supplies as well as the horse supplies. So we're hoping to see a savings there, but we're not sure yet.
okay, that'd be one to watch in terms of moving forward, if that comes to fruition on that side, or from more the efficiency standpoint, maybe we recognize some of that. So
there's a future efficiency, Counselor, which is the building itself, the animal shelter in Rosendale is probably nearing the end of its life cycle. And so I think as we are looking at the Franklin Park master plan, is there a way to incorporate that so that if we're taking care of horses already, is there an opportunity to build out a shelter as part of the facility, or is it better to renovate it in its existing location? But right now, it is in a fairly awkward place for people to access.
Gotcha. Chairing is Councilor Red Flynn. Any questions at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panelists for being here. Chris, I was working on, for the last year and a half, working with Chris Osgood on an issue as it relates to dogs, but it was stray voltage issues that several dogs have been electrocuted over the last 10, 15 years or so. mostly during the winter time, often stepping on like manhole covers and electricity building up from the ground. So we probably will have another meeting over the next couple of months as we head towards the summer and prepare for the winter. But is this an issue that you would work with us on, especially on like a public education campaign?
No, I think it would be really important. There's two things, and I'm sure Chief Osgood explained this to you ad nauseum, that unfortunately some of our levers of control are really controlled by the Department of Public Utilities. That being said, Eversource does seem very committed to public engagement on very specific issues. Some of those issues they have is the predatory practices of third-party energy suppliers. And so I'm sure you've received complaints from some of the senior citizens about people knocking on the door, asking them to look at their electricity bills and items like that. With their commitment to community engagement on some of those other issues, I wonder if we could also extract a commitment from Eversource and in part for the amount of electricity that they provide in the city grid as well, to try to educate the public about that. I think the most important part of that, though, is to see what levers of control we could possibly have in some of the conversations, and we do have some pretty complicated contractual conversations upcoming with Eversource, especially around community choice energy and other items. So we would be happy to work with your office and also talk about those issues. We do have an upcoming memorandum of agreement that's being negotiated with Eversource on unrelated items. And so we'd be happy to engage on that item as well, because it's incredibly upsetting, not only to the owners, but to the community when that happens. And then, of course, the fear is that although it's highly unlikely that it would result in a human fatality, I do think it creates a sense of panic in the community that, a small child could be hurt. So.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I think we have made significant progress over the last year and a half on this issue. So I hope that we can continue to make progress. And just one final question, Chris. Do you have a plan where you can help low-income families that own a dog with the opportunity to get, I know the city does have a vaccination plan where an owner can bring their dog to get various shots. It seems like it works well, but do you have a plan that type of plan will continue in the city?
It will, and we've been very fortunate. I have to say, the Director of Animal Care and Control, Amanda Kennedy, is one of the most progressive public servants I've ever met, and she has been very, very aggressive about removing barriers to licensing and also vaccinations. And so she's been traveling mostly to BCYF community centers to offer these rabies clinics and these licensing clinics, and I've just been so impressed with the way that she's doing this in a very dynamic urban environment. It's obviously very important because the healthier our residents' dogs are, the less likely it is that they're going to spread disease throughout the population. So we're committed to continuing that. I will say that there are some budgetary restrictions about how far we can expand that activity. But when you look at the balance of the problem, if we didn't offer those free clinics as opposed to the revenue we would receive if everyone who was showing up was actually paying a full fee, I think the public health benefits far outweigh the relatively small money we would have coming into the revolving fund. So we're committed to it because I actually think it saves us money on the other end.
Yeah, I agree. I was at one of the clinics at the Condon School last year, and there was a great turnout for it, and it worked well. It was well organized, well planned. So it went over well. It was very helpful, especially to low-income families. So I just want to say thank you to the group that organized it, the Animal Control. I believe it was Amanda.
Yeah. No, it definitely, I do think there's room for more. We just have to figure out how we do it.
Excellent. No, No further questions, and I just want to say thank you to your team, Chris, for taking this initiative on. I think it makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And then obviously, real-time questions coming into my office from the public. The question is, how will the transfer impact pet adoption programs that are currently operated by animal control?
Sure. So it won't impact it at all right away. What I will say is that we would be remiss if we didn't look at the transfer as an opportunity to say, are we actually achieving best practices? And, again, one of the items that I would flag is just the availability of the public to get to the Mahler Road Animal Shelter itself. It's a fairly complicated site to get to. It's a bit of a walk from Forest Hills. There's not a lot of public parking around the shelter. So are there adoption clinics that the city could run where we actually, in addition to rabies vaccinations and registrations, could we actually bring some of these dogs and cats to other locations to maybe engage with another population that is actually interested in pet ownership? But then as far as the actual process and costs associated with it, we'll be working very closely with Director Kennedy to try to implement any reforms. I know she is very committed to having the most progressive animal care control unit in the country. And so we look forward to receiving her recommendations.
And another question was, they're excited to see animal control going to parks. Will that result in more dog parks? And are there any additional dog parks planned for the city?
So we do have a good story to tell there. Unfortunately, the good story that we tell still demonstrates that we are way behind the national average in dog parks. We had some lost years with a very well-intentioned ordinance in the city of Boston that required a friends group to help pay for the off-leash dog park and help maintain it. It was very well-intentioned because at the time the Boston Parks and Recreation Department was unclear how they were going to fund dog parks in the city. What we've been able to do, though, is we've been able to incorporate that into our additional operating budget. And so we do have new dog parks happening at Garvey Park in Dorchester, Downer Ave in Dorchester, and we were very excited about the recently opened Di Filippo off-leash dog park in the North End. What I would say is that in general, after a certain acreage, if there's a large neighborhood park, we should at least have an off-leash dog area in that neighborhood park, and that just needs to be part of our comprehensive redesigns.
Perfect. Very good. Good stuff. Is there any questions you guys have of us? Going to look try to get a committee report turned around pretty quickly and get it before the council for a
we just
vote,
really appreciate the council's coordination, cooperation on this. Thank you.
Okay, good. So with respect to docket 0663, it's an ordinance amending the City of Boston Code, specifically ordinances in Chapter 6, 7, 16, and 18 concerning the registration and licensing of dogs and the transfer of animal care and control unit from Inspectional Services Department to the Parks and Recs Department. The Committee on Government Operations is adjourned. Thank you for the work. See the efforts that you put in as Director of Finance. So appreciate your time and attention to this issue, and hopefully the council will get it turned around quickly so we can move forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right.